Hello, you're watching Proactive. I'm joined by VivoPower Advisory Council member Philip Von Wulffen. Philip, very good to speak with you. Everyone's talking about the AI boom, but you say the real bottleneck isn't chips or data, it's power. Why is electricity now the limiting factor?
Yeah. Well, the world is really changing. I mean, if you look back a couple of years ago, data centers were being built in the 10 to 20 megawatt size, and this was really mainly for cloud. That started coming from London, what they now call the flap markets or flap D markets sometimes, which includes Frankfurt, London, Amsterdam, and Paris. Today, with AI completely changing the density they need, right? AI chips need to be very close to each other, so the power going to the individual rack has massively increased. That ridiculous power obviously has to be cooled and needs a lot of electricity, and so that's really the big difference there. It also means that today's AI companies are not looking for the, let's say, perfect location in terms of fiber first. They're looking for power first, and that makes the land development for data centers much more attractive and changes the game a bit.
From what you're seeing globally, Philip, are governments and tech companies underestimating just how big the power challenge for AI actually is?
Well, the thing for governments really is it's a pretty big shift, right? I think if you're today, and this is one of the big drivers that actually got me started in the industry. I was traveling in Southeast Asia, in Cambodia, with my daughter, and spent a very short stint in also Myanmar, where kind of you today have, let's say, very, very challenged states. If we as a global society don't find ways to allow them to participate in AI, they're completely going to fall behind, right? Today, it's already difficult for them to keep up, but basically every country will have to develop AI. So are countries underestimating? Yes. I think you do have still even in kind of very developed countries like in Europe, you have very slow processes. I try to develop a data center site in countries like Germany, but sometimes Sweden as well. It can take 6, 7 years to have a property ready, and then you get a lot of pushback also, kind of from a populist side from government saying, we're wasting energy with data centers. Well, actually, and this is true for cloud as well as for AI. We have to participate. If we don't, we're going to fall behind. And I think you will see massive shifts in economies where power will move to countries that are faster at developing power and are changing the paradigm. Europe just announced that they have underestimated the power need. And this is still not on a country by country side. You have countries that have embraced, for example, nuclear. But as a region, we still have many countries that have not. And I think we will actually need that extra power in order to keep up. I mean, look at the scale of development in the US, probably second when China, and then compare that to Europe. So we have a massive unmet demand.
To put this into perspective, how much electricity does a modern AI data center actually need compared with a traditional data center?
Well, initially I said, the traditional data center was in the range, and I mean, we have lots of very effective cloud data centers in the 3 megawatt range, right? So today, if you have a really what they call a mega AI training site, that ideally can be 500 megawatts to a gigawatt. Those sites are rare and hard to find. Obviously, parallel to that, you need to have the infrastructure in place to get the data there. So it really depends. There are always going to be edge sites necessary, which can go from very small, let's say, desktop solutions to urban solutions. I think in the past, in many locations, you had these towers with 7 floors, 18 floors, whatever. That is history. We're now needing to put a lot of cooling into each of these floors, which creates all kinds of weight problems, risks with water seeping through, etc. So modern data centers need more space. And obviously, with AI, the denser you can put the chips, the more effective the training is on these data centers. So they look for very, very powerful sites.
When companies talk about gigawatt scale AI campuses, what does that really mean in terms of infrastructure and energy supply?
It's interesting. It's what I said before with the towers. So today's effective data centers for AI are cube white spaces. The white space is the area where the chips are installed. And what they're doing now is putting the chips as close as possible to each other. So you don't want them in long tubes where kind of the end-to-end distance between chips is quite far. But that also means if you have a gigawatt in a cube white space, the area around that cube, which provides the power transmission, the cooling, and all of the other technology, is huge, right? So these gigawatt sites are very, very specifically developed for AI. They have very specific chips. It tends to be, bleeding edge in the sense that the chips today that are announced that will be in data centers from mid 27, they need technology that has not been finally developed yet. So we're constantly racing against kind of the physics, right? I mean, the amount of cooling in today's technology to cool one of these hyperscale data centers is really it breaks the laws of physics. We would need 1 meter diameter cooling pipes going into a rack, right? Doesn't work. So we have to reinvent that. So there are massive changes, which at the end reflect on the type of land and power we need.
As you mentioned earlier, even if you have the money and the land, plugging a data center into the grid can take years. What's causing those delays, Philip?
A big part is bureaucracy, which I'm not a huge kind of anti-bureaucracy advocate. I think much of our bureaucracy is very important. I really believe data protection, for example, is critical. When it comes to developing data centers, a big issue is how easy is it to convert land into potential data center land? Then how quickly does a jurisdiction need to give you a building permit on that land? And then finally, of course, how quickly can the electricity infrastructure be provided? So in many cases, even if you have the available local power from a power plant, just connecting that power can take a long time. And the bottlenecks can be anything from politics, can be obviously you often have to take power lines or fiber across different properties. So countries that have a very efficient process in making that available can have advantages. And then finally, things like technology, being available. One big problem is transformers. Transformers tend to be almost exclusively manufactured in Asia. A big part of that is in China. If it takes 3 years to put the transformers into a power station, then that obviously can be a big delay. So all of these are effects that can cause delays.
Is this why we're seeing more interest in dedicated power sources, things like renewables, microgrids, or co-located generation?
I think at the moment, all of the above, yes. Co-location is a big trend in the last couple of years. I think more and more players are finding ways either with micro nuclear power plants, which are an interesting solution. I think there will be markets where that will definitely play out. Gas plays a very big role. So having on-site power generation using LNG is quite a critical new infrastructure, especially when you look at places like the Middle East, where you have a lot of available gas and space. And then, I mean, at the end of the day, obviously, we need to very, very carefully keep ESG in perspective. It is critical for us to be as clean as possible. I think going back to coal generation in Europe is really not an option that is ideal. So integrating offshore wind, onshore wind, solar is very critical. There you have other problems. You generally need a grid connection or otherwise you have to find very complicated best solutions with batteries because data centers, less AI data centers, they're less susceptible to having constant power, whereas cloud obviously needs power 24/7. So you can't rely only on wind. With AI, that can be managed a bit better, right? You can train at certain times, and if you really have a shortage of power, you reduce the training. But generally, what you're looking for is a mix of power and as clean as possible. The other big element on ESG is obviously using the heat wisely. So when we use energy, wasting that into the environment as heat is not a very efficient use. So making sure that kind of you find solutions to take the heat that can be in the Nordics very interesting, in some parts of Germany as well, in municipal heating. So if you can find efficient ways to heat local housing, that's a good use. There are also many solutions coming up, for example, with vertical farming. So using the heat to feed greenhouses or other types of farming.
Philip, thank you very much for your insights today.
Thank you for having me.
Philip Von Wulffen is VivoPower Advisory Council member.